I'd like to thank everyone for joining us on today's webinar of Medicaid Annual Reviews. This is going to provide you with guidance for assisting consumers. A couple housekeeping items. We mute your line upon entry, but we do ask that you go ahead and mute your line as well. Sometimes we get some feedback and some bleed over, so we want to try to avoid that. If you have questions about the content being presented today, we ask that you put those questions in the Q&A. If you have technical questions regarding if that's a sound component or some other issue, you can put those questions in the chat box. Also, just saw a comment, someone mentioned that it looks like they're the only one that is on the webinar. No, that is also a feature that is set up that the participant list is not shown. I can tell you that right now we do have 148 folks that are on the webinar. I suspect that there's probably more than that, as some of you are probably in offices or conference rooms together listening. So with those housekeeping items, I am going to turn this over to our presenters today, Anna Witherbee and Charles Bentley.
Good morning, everyone. We're here to talk today about the annual review process for Medicaid, to kind of go through how we can assist, or you can assist your consumers in completing those annual reviews, so we can try to avoid people just from dropping off Medicaid and not having access to services just because they don't follow through on some technical requirement. There's been a lot of discussion of this in the past several months. One thing I want to just say, the Family Support Division, they do have two systems. Their family Medicaid cases are in one system. Their Medicaid cases for the elderly, blind, and disabled are in another system. And those systems do work slightly differently, quite a bit differently. And so sometimes that causes some confusion. So we just want to try to clear some of that up and go through again how we can best assist our consumers so we don't lose, clients don't lose eligibility when they need those services. First off, the annual review requirement, it is a requirement in federal regulations and in Missouri state law that all Medicaid recipients have an annual review of their eligibility. Sometimes this is referred to as an annual reinvestigation, a reauthorization, a recertification. One thing I want to point out about this, though, sometimes, and we're going to go through the tool how you can see when a review is coming due. But sometimes we worry that if a review is due and isn't completed, that that means the client's lost eligibility. And that's not really correct. The client can lose eligibility if an annual review is not completed, but that only happens if Family Support Division follows due process requirements and sends notice, not just that you have to send a review back to them, but that they're going to close your case for not doing something. So when we see an overdue review, if you look in CMOR or in EMOMed and you see that their Medicaid is still active, that means that maybe they were due for a review and the review's overdue, but their Medicaid has continued. So all that overdue review means is that Family Support Division is behind in their work, and nothing, though, is going to happen until Family Support Division does send another notice that says we're going to close your case and gives the client advance notice of that. So Family Support Division's annual review process, in the month prior to the review month, the Family Support Division is going to mail an annual review form to the consumer. And there's two separate review forms. One is the review form for cases that are in what they call their FAMOUS system, which is for the elderly, blind, and disabled. That's an FA 402. And then there's a different review form for their family Medicaid cases, which is for their children and low-income parents, which is the IM1U. When they send the form out, the form is due back on the first working day of the review month. One thing we've run into is due to some issues they have in their various systems, sometimes if they get a review form before their system knows it's been sent out, they can't enter it in the system, so you can send in a review form and it just gets filed somewhere, and we have to have them go look for it, or our FSD worker looks in their file room for it. So what we're suggesting that you do is that you don't have to wait, because sometimes the clients don't keep the review form, or they don't get it, it's mailed to the wrong address, etc. So these review forms are available on the DMH website. We have a link to them. You can print one off and fill it out for the client. So when you see it's due, you can go ahead. You don't have to wait for them to get the actual review form from FSD. But what we want to do is not send that review form until the 15th day of the month prior to the review due date. So like for reviews that are due September 1st, you wouldn't send those back to FSD until August 15th. Okay. To assist you all with helping the clients and knowing when reviews are due, on the 3rd of each month, DMH produces a listing of cases due for a Medicaid annual review for each CMHC, each ADA provider, each DD regional office, and each of our large behavioral health institutions, Fulton State Hospital, etc. The report name is listed on here. I think you have people in your organizations that know how to find it and download it and get it out to the people that need it. This report, there are two sections to the report. One section is cases coming due for review within the next 3 months, and another section that is cases that are overdue or closed within the last 3 months. The cases that are due within 3 months section of the report, that shows cases that are due in each of the next 3 months after the report. So these are the current ones coming due. Nothing should have been sent in on them yet because it's not due yet. So like your August 3rd report would have shown cases due September 1, October 1, November 1. The overdue section of the report shows cases that were due in the current month and the preceding 2 months. So the August 3rd report is also going to have cases listed where a review has not been completed that was still due June 1, July 1, and August 1, which for some of you, this makes this a very large report. And I think we've considered maybe we need to not have so many months on this report. So if anybody has any thoughts on that, we'd appreciate you sending that to us after this webinar. What we're considering or thinking might be more beneficial for the ones coming due, if we maybe basically took this report down to just showing 3 months, the ones that are due in the month of the report, so the August, and then the next 2 months. So instead of showing 6 months worth of cases on a report, the August 3rd report would have only shown reviews due August 1st, September 1st, and October 1st. The reason for that is the August 1st ones, they may still be open, but FSD, the review was due August 1st. They may be still working on them. They may be in the process of sending out adverse action notices to close the consumer for not sending in the review form. Whereas on the ones that were due June 1st, July 1, FSD is not doing that at this time. If they were going to close them for not sending in the review form, they would have already started that process. So it's like for whatever reason, they've continued them without completing the review. So it probably, those are not cases that we really need to pay much attention to unless the client gets something in the mail from FSD. The reason for dropping those on that, like the November 1st ones, those 3 months out, it's almost like that just adds to your list and maybe leads to people starting the process and sending things in a little too early, and then therefore FSD just files it away and doesn't find it when it really is due. So we'd appreciate any feedback you have on that, changes to the report. Okay. Again, kind of as I was saying before, you want to prioritize the consumers on this report, see which ones you should be paying attention to. And the ones you should prioritize are looking at the ones that are due in the month following the month of the report. Usually August, you're looking at those September ones, the ones that were due, and also then the ones that were due in the month of August, on August 1st. For those due on the first day of the next month, September 1's one, due September 1st, that's where you really want to make sure that you're working with the consumer, that you're getting the proper form, Family Medicaid or Medicaid for the elderly, blind, and disabled, completed, and you're submitting that to FSD sometime between the 15th of August and the last day of August, August 31st. You can either submit the forms to your local FSD office, or FSD has also given us a special email address that our DMH agencies can scan those forms and email them to a particular FSD email address. They ask us not to put that out on our website, but you can contact our DMH Medicaid unit at this email address on this slide, and Anna, or our FSD worker, will send you that email address. Okay, again, like I said, you don't have to wait for the FSD is sending. They really aren't giving the client a whole lot of notice to return these review forms anymore. At one point, they were sending them out 2 months ahead of time. Now they're back to only sending them out. The ones due in September are sent out in August. You don't have to wait for the consumer to get the review form that is mailed to them by FSD. Sometimes you may talk to local FSD office people and they say, oh, you should do that. You should wait. There are two forms. The form that is for the elderly, blind, and disabled, it's just basically a blank form that they mail out to the consumer. The form for the Family Medicaid, it does have some fields pre-populated. It'll have the names of the people, etc. But you don't have to wait and use that form. No matter what anybody at FSD tells you, that's just a misunderstanding, because you can print off a blank form and fill it out and give them all the information they need. And it really doesn't make their job that much harder if you use that, as long as you're using the proper form. Then you send back the one that was they mailed to the consumer. The reason you don't want to wait is a lot of times, especially with the Family Medicaid cases that they haven't necessarily looked at in a long time, they may have a bad address. Your consumer may not actually get the form that's mailed out to them. So if you see them on the report as due and the consumer doesn't have a form that was mailed out to them by FSD, you should go ahead, download the proper form, fill it out, and get it sent in. Okay, again, so this slide here, there are two separate forms, two separate systems that they're in. This slide here lists the Medicaid based on the age, blind, and disabled. And it gives you a list of how those cases, the names that are on the report that we send out to you, along with the ME code that goes with those categories. So you will see on the report that we submit, you'll see people listed as aid to the blind and supplemental aid to the blind. This is literally the exact terminology you're going to see on the report. So if you see MO HealthNet assistance, aid to the blind, you see supplemental nursing care, you see ticket to work health assurance, any of those on this slide, you need to be using the FA 402 form to complete and send in to FSD. The family Medicaid MO HealthNet cases, they use the form IM1U. So this lists this is how those cases are listed on the report you get. You see anything on this list, MO HealthNet for families, MO HealthNet for kids. That means you need to complete the IM1U and submit that to FSD. Okay, now Anna is going to go over with you some more information about how to submit the actual annual review form, a little about how to make sure you're an authorized representative, which does help.
Okay, so when you're submitting the annual review form, if the consumer has any income other than Social Security or SSI, you'll need to submit current verification with the review whenever possible. And current verification would be the most recent 30 days of gross income, so usually pay stubs or something like that will work. Make sure to write the current balance of any bank accounts on the review form where indicated. If this is a new account, provide bank statements showing the current month's balance with the review whenever possible. FSD is taking client statement on the annual reviews regarding the balance of pre-existing accounts as long as it's not questionable. So if you leave that blank, they will request bank statements, but if you do put a number in there, then they'll take that statement. If you don't have the verification of income or new bank accounts, don't delay in sending in the annual review. You can go ahead and send it in, and then once it's processed, they'll send out a request for any missing verification. If possible, you'll want to have the client, the parent caretaker, if the client is a child, sign the IM6AR, that's the authorized representative form, naming your agency or a staff person as his or her authorized representative. The form IM6AR is available at the link on the slide. Multiple people can be the authorized representative. There's no downside for being the authorized representative. And if the authorized rep form is filled out correctly, FSD will send correspondence to both the client and the authorized representative. And on that form, what you want to look for is there's a section where it says, note, by appointing the authorized representative, you're consenting to allow the FSD to send letters, notices to your authorized representative. And there are, for MO HealthNet, 4 boxes. And you want to make sure that the first 2, at the very least, are checked. And that's helping me apply for MO HealthNet coverage and acting on our behalf if we get MO HealthNet coverage, including annual reviews and reporting changes. If you only check that first box, after the application process is complete, they will end you as the authorized representative, so no mail will be sent out to you or anything. Once the review form is received, FSD may send a request for current verification of resources and income, other than Social Security and SSI. By including all verification of income, bank balances, etc. with the annual review, then there's no need for them to send a request, and the annual review will be processed quicker with no issues. Another note is FSD is currently in the process of changing how they require people to apply for other benefits like SSD and SSI if they don't already have them. If the client has not applied for SSDI or SSI within the past 12 months, they may start requesting proof of application at the annual review instead of at the application. If the requested verification is not received by the due date, FSD will send a notice that Medicaid will close in 10 days for failure to provide verification. The client has 30 days from the date of closure to provide all needed verification. And if they do so, we can request that the closing be canceled and the case reopened. When the review is completed, a notice is sent to the consumer confirming the continued eligibility. If there are any changes in eligibility, a separate notice is sent. If the annual review is not received by the first day of the month that it's due, an adverse action will be mailed out, giving the client an additional 10 days to provide the paperwork. The case will close 10 days after the adverse action is mailed out unless the annual review is received or the consumer requests an appeal or a hearing within those 10 days. If the case has been closed for less than 30 days, email us at dmh.medicaideligibility@dmh.mo.gov. In some cases, we can request the closing be canceled and processing continue, or the review may be able to be used as a new application if too much time has passed. Consumers in the overdue section that were due in the report month, so June 1st on the June report, are still active on the day of the report, but the review has not been completed. Consumers on the report that have a due date prior to the month of the report have either been closed or have remained open without a completed review. You'll want to check those due in the report month to make sure the form has been submitted. Check CMOR on those due in the months prior to see if the Medicaid is closed. No action is necessary on those that remain open. When it says that it's overdue, that doesn't mean that you or the client has done anything wrong. It means that the Family Support Division is overdue on completing the processing. If it's open, it means that they have the review. Use this, so reviews due in the second or third month after the report month. Use this section only for planning purposes. And as Charles talked about earlier, we're considering trimming this down, and we'd appreciate your feedback on that. And review forms should not be submitted prior to the 15th day of the month before the due date. And we already talked about that as well. Medicaid eligibility on the DMH website. We have some information you can find on dmh.mo.gov, and this tells you how to navigate to that. And then if you have any questions, I think that we will take questions now.
First question here we have is, the past 2 months, I have been receiving the review form giving me only 2 weeks to complete and submit to any. Is anyone else having that issue? Everyone is having that issue because that is how that is the time frame FSD is now mailing the forms out in. I was able to print one off the website before joining the webinar. I can send you a copy if you don't have one. Again, that's that kind of back to the first question. That's where we were talking about if you see them on the report that they're due, and don't wait for the consumer to get it before you start doing what you need to do to get the consumer to complete it, or you complete it for them based on the information in your records. Waiting for them to get it, that often doesn't work if you need to, because of when your scheduled meetings with the consumer is and things like that. So you don't have to wait. You can download the form, and the link is on our website. Can you explain why children in low-income families, their Medicaid was dropped without explanation? What is the best course of action in this case? Well, that's a complicated question, and I think FSD and the Department of Social Services have been struggling to answer that question. Basically, what we think is going on, FSD back in a few years ago, 2014, they moved their family Medicaid cases to this new computer system. And they had to do that in a very quick manner. And so it wasn't necessarily fully functional when it first was started using it. And there was a time period of a few years where they would approve cases, but the annual review process wasn't really functioning right, so they weren't doing annual reviews. And now, about a year to a year and a half ago, they got the functionality to do the annual reviews into the new system, and so they started sending out the review forms. So one of the problems, though, I think that's why that's led to, and we don't really see the number of, we're not seeing drops in the number of our elderly and disabled cases. Our Department of Social Services isn't, that they're seeing in their kids. And that's because the kids are in the new system, the elderly and disabled are in the old system. When they went a few years without doing annual reviews, what that leads to is a lot of times people move, and so their new address was not being put in the system. So when FSD started doing annual reviews again, they were mailing out the review form to the most recent address they had for the family. If the family wasn't no longer at that address, they'd ever receive the form, which then makes it very difficult for them to fill out the form and return it to FSD. FSD then doesn't get the review form unless they have other information, another way to complete the review. They then started the adverse action process to close those families and those children for not complying. Also, there were some other contributing factors. Sometimes for the Medicaid for the elderly and disabled, if a client is on food stamps, the food stamps cases and the elderly and disabled cases are in the same computer system for Medicaid. So if you report a change in your address for food stamps, it updates your Medicaid case. For the family Medicaid cases, they're in a separate system than the food stamp case is, so sometimes a family might have reported a new address for their food stamp case, it's updated, but that address was not transferred over to their family Medicaid case. So those kind of things, I think, have been a lot of what's contributed to the drop in the number of kids. They're simply, the families are not getting those forms, they're not getting completed, and that results in kids being closed. We don't know what FSD's overall strategy or social services' overall strategy is to address that, or how significant a problem they've identified it to be. On the surface, it seems to be a big problem. What we can do for our DMH consumers is, when you see them on the report as due or overdue, check and see more to see if that Medicaid is still open. If you see that Medicaid stopping, that's where you may need to just start a new application, or if the closing is recent, within the last, if the closing at the end date is within the last 30 days or so, those would maybe, rather than just go to immediately do a new application, if you would email us at this dmh.medicaideligibility@dmh.mo.gov, either Anna or our FSD worker here can look at the case, find out, and possibly get that case reopened without a new application. One thing, even though FSD they've identified they've lost like 90,000 kids in the last year, their numbers have went down by that much. When we looked back in, I think the last time we looked at it on our children in DMH cases, FSD had lost about 55,000 kids from June through the end of January. DMH had only lost about 1,500 kids. We don't know if our numbers have decreased more since then, but I think a lot of that is due to the fact that our kids are not dropping off as quick as other kids, because you all are out there working with the families, helping make sure they get things in, and we do have Anna and our FSD worker, Elisa, who can look things up and find out if there's been an error in the closing.
And the other thing is, if a case closes and it wasn't ever on the annual review list and you're not sure why it closed, feel free to email us too. This isn't just for annual reviews. Anytime a case is closed or you have any questions about coverage, you're welcome to email us and we're happy to look into the case.
Okay. Can you find the DMH report of consumers due for, where can you find the, it's
on the FTP site.
Thank you. Yes, it's on the FTP site. That's where a lot of lots of other DMH reports are placed on those sites. There's somebody in your organization that knows how to find those. If you're really struggling with that, send us an email and we'll send you some more specific instructions. Okay, a question here is, where does ME Code 38 fall on the list of annual reviews? ME Code 38 is for the former foster kids category. They are not required to have an annual review. So there are ME codes that are not going to be on this report because an annual review is not required. Those are primarily your cases that are for children that are in the foster care system or the former foster kids, kids in DYS custody, because those children, their Medicaid is it's a categorical eligibility. They get Medicaid just by being in the custody of the state. That also includes your adoption subsidy kids. Who has access to the Medicaid reauthorization report? That would be dependent on your organization. Someone at each regional office has access to it. Someone at each CMHC has access to it. Multiple people have access to it. And then internally, each organization has their own process for getting the report out to the people that need it. What kind of verification is needed to show that SSI has been applied for? Something from the Social Security Administration.
If there's been an application within the past year and you know there's been an application, it'll show on their interface, so you won't need to do anything. But if you're just applying at the time of the annual review for the first time in 12 months, it can be like if you apply online, you'll get a confirmation page that says that your application has been submitted. That will work. Social Security can provide a letter. If you have an upcoming appointment to complete an in-person application, there's paperwork that they mail you about that, and that can also be used as verification. And if they are working with a law firm to request an appeal, then a letter from the law firm will also work.
Applications should go to FSD hospital applications email and redeterminations to DMH.Medicaid eligibility. That's the question, and the answer is you're half right. When you're submitting new applications, the best way to submit them for the Medicaid for the disabled and the elderly, the blind, is to complete the application and send it to, scan it, and send it to FSD Hospital Applications, that email address. That is the best way to send those applications in. For if you're helping a family apply, probably the best thing to do is to go online with the person and help them submit an online application if they're just applying for Medicaid for MO HealthNet for families or MO HealthNet for kids. The redeterminations, no, you shouldn't send them to the DMH.Medicaid eligibility email is our little Medicaid unit here at DMH. So do not send all of your annual reviews to us. What you can either send them to any local FSD office, resource center, or we can give you a special FSD email address to send them to. So if you want that special email address where you can scan and email your annual reviews to, send an email asking for the FSD address to our email, and we'll give it to you. They just didn't want us to put it out there on a public site.
Right, because it's not just you who has access to this presentation. We have had people outside of DMH agencies and facilities who send me questions at the mailbox because they've come across this. And because the email address that we'll give you is a small unit that specifically only does the annual reviews for MO HealthNet for the elderly, blind, and disabled, they really want to limit who has access to that email address.
Okay. So, if an agency is designated as an authorized representative, will a recertification request be sent to both the individual and the agency? It should be for your cases that are for Medicaid that is in the old system for the elderly, blind, and disabled. It will be, you will get a copy of anything that's sent to the consumer if you're the authorized representative. If it's a family Medicaid case, even though you're listed as the authorized representative, FSD seems to be struggling with actually.
The system won't automatically send it. The processing worker should send you a copy, but that's where the report comes in really handy as a backup, just in case you don't get it. Due to worker error, you can still download it and submit it if you know that it's coming due. We already answered that.
Okay. Is there a difference in the application process for individuals who were or are receiving adoption subsidy? Do they have to reapply when they turn at age 18 and then at age 19? Okay. So for kids that are receiving an adoption subsidy, they automatically have Medicaid until the Department of Social Services Children's Division ends their adoption subsidy. So when the adoption subsidy ends, yes, that child needs that, well, they're an adult by now. That person needs to submit a new application for Medicaid. It's not necessarily, those adoption subsidies will end at various times. They're individual agreements between the Children's Division and the family that's adopting the child. A lot of them do end at age 18 or age 19. Some end as late as age 21. But when that Medicaid, when they're in one of those adoption subsidies Medicaid categories and that adoption subsidy ends, you'll see the Medicaid will stop and a new application needs to be sent to FSD if the individual thinks they qualify for Medicaid based on a disability, which I would expect most kids receiving adoption subsidy that are receiving services from Department of Mental Health, either CPR or developmental disabilities waiver services, they probably will qualify as disabled as an adult. Can the review form be emailed to the representative for faster return of?
No, FSD doesn't have the ability to email documentation at this time.
At what point would an individual's 401k be considered an asset? If they have a retirement plan such as a 401k and it's transferred to an ABLE account, would this impact their Medicaid asset limit? This is, I think you need to probably send this question to us separately and we'll send out an answer to it. But just the simple answer is anything that's put in an ABLE account is not considered an asset once it's in the ABLE account. 401ks, in general, except for disabled children cases, are considered an asset, but I think we need some more specifics to address that really. Where do we find the report of consumers due for an annual review?
We've answered that. It's on the FTP site.
When someone turns 18 and ongoing, do the families only fill out the application based on the individual? Okay. It depends on whether, if you're applying for someone based on disability, once the person is an adult, they're age 18, then the only people that you need to list on the application are the person that's applying for Medicaid, the person with a disability, and their spouse, if they have one, and the spouse is living with them. When they're under age 18, you have to include their parents that are in the home on the application. If we were talking about a family Medicaid case, it would be a totally different answer. Low-income children can receive, they're still considered a child for family Medicaid up until age 19. So turning 18 has no effect on their eligibility and who's listed on a family Medicaid case.
Oh, let's be done with it.
Okay. Each time DMH case manager received Medicaid review forms or correspondence from MO HealthNet for consumers, we've been advised it is our provider contractor's responsibility to follow up with those requests. The question is, do we take action as we receive the notification or leave it up to our provider contractor? I assume this is from a regional office. That's kind of an internal decision on what your relationship is and who's the authorized representative. I think maybe if you give us some specifics, we can get with Developmental Disabilities Division people and give you a more specific answer.
Feel free to email us that question.
If a client has a Midwest Special Needs Trust, what information needs to be submitted? You need to put on the annual review form that they have the trust.
And then they need the complete copy of the trust. So that's all appendixes and anything like that.
Right, and you don't necessarily need to send that with an annual review. Again, this gets back to like new bank accounts. If this is a trust that's already known about, FSD may already have all of that stuff. If it's a new trust that's been established, they're definitely going to need all of that stuff. So on new applications, you definitely need to include all those documents. On the annual review, if you're not sure, the main thing for the annual review, again, the case is already active. So what you need to make sure you're doing on the annual review form is you're listing what you know the consumer has. If you think maybe they may have already known about this trust, make sure you put the trust down and the current value of it, or your estimate of that. Then FSD will look at the case. They'll say, oh, we don't have the trust, and then they will send a request, and that's where you need to send the complete copy with all the documents. FSD maybe they already knew about it. They've already documented it's a special needs trust that's not available. So they may need nothing. So there's a difference between what you would do on an application and what you would do on an annual review. Okay, we've got another question here about adoption subsidy, and I think we've already addressed that. What if you can't have the family come in and fill out a new application online with you? Then where do those applications get faxed or scanned to? local?
For the MO HealthNet for families or kids cases, if they can't do it online, it can go to your local office. And that information can be found on the dss.mo.gov website.
So they should not apply at 18 but wait until 19, or did I misunderstand? I think this is a follow-up to one of our other questions. I'm not sure which one, about the
If the client has adoption subsidy, you can't apply for MO HealthNet until that has ended. And we're always happy to check on a case and see if there's an end date for adoption subsidy. If the child or the client is disabled, there is no age limit on applying for the elderly, blind, and disabled, so it's fine to apply for that regardless of age. MO HealthNet for families or MO HealthNet for kids is for children up to age 19, and young families or families, people with young children, can get coverage if they're very low income, and pregnant women.
Yeah. I mean, if you know an adoption subsidy is about to end, and I don't know how you know that unless you're talking to the adoptive parents and they have the document that they got from Children's Division years ago. But if you know the adoption subsidy is about to end, you can go ahead and submit the application within, say, 30 days or so, but FSD cannot approve it until the adoption subsidy actually ends. And a lot of times I think they probably would just see that the Medicaid is active in Children's Division system and they would automatically reject it, probably.
So as an example, if you have a kid whose adoption subsidy has ended and they are 18, technically the family has the choice, if they're a low-income family, to apply for MO HealthNet for kids for the child, or to apply for MO HealthNet for disabled for the child. If the child is disabled, because they're 18 and the MO HealthNet for kids coverage will end in under a year, the better choice almost always would be to go ahead and apply for MO HealthNet for disabled, regardless of age, if they're disabled at that point.
Right, because that coverage will continue beyond their age 8, turning 19, and they won't have to provide information about their adoptive parents' income and things. Yeah, what form should be used to apply for adoption subsidy? You don't apply for. You go through the Children's Division to get an adoption subsidy. You don't apply for it. These are adoption subsidies, Children's Division, when they have taken custody of a child, that child's been in foster care, and reunification with the natural parents is no longer considered feasible, and parental rights are terminated by a court. Then Children's Division will try to place the child in an adoptive home if there's no relative that they can place the child with, and then it's between Children's Division and the prospective adoptive parents whether there's a subsidy.
It looks like that was our last question. Did we? One more. Oh, there's one more.
What if the family has moved out of state with foster children? The family had Medicaid in Iowa. Moved from another. Okay, if a child moved from, Medicaid is state specific. So if a child having Medicaid in another state, that other state is going to be closing their Medicaid. Sometimes, though, if it's within the foster care system, the foster care agencies with the two states will work out an agreement but that's going to be done by the Children's Division. That's not going to be an application for Medicaid that we're talking about here that goes through Family Support Division. The other state may have may agree to, because their Medicaid, Iowa's Medicaid is not going to, there's not going to be providers in Jefferson City, say, that accept Iowa Medicaid. The Iowa Children's Division, whatever, Child Welfare Agency, would contact the Children's Division in Missouri. They would work out an agreement where Children's Division would open up the child for Medicaid in Missouri's system and Children's Division system here, but that's...
I'd suggest contacting your local Children's Division office, and that can also be found at dss.mo.gov. Are there any other questions? Well, if you think of anything later, feel free to email us at that dmh.medicaideligibility@dmh.mo.gov. We're always happy to answer questions or research cases for you.
Yeah, and I think we will be posting this on the website somewhere, right, Heike? The actual PowerPoint.
Yes, we will be posting the PowerPoint and the recording of the webinar. If you are not signed up to receive email blasts from the Division of Developmental Disabilities, I suggest that you do that by going to the DD homepage. In the carousel at the top of that page, there is a panel that will link you to the sign-up process. By doing so, you'll be notified with an email blast when the recording and presentation becomes available. And with that, we thank you for your participation today.